Welcome back to the Fapstinence podcast. I'm Peter, and I'm joined by Kevin, my co-host. We're going to be trying to help you guys find freedom from porn. That's really the whole purpose of this podcast. And this whole segment, we've really been talking about No Nut November. In the last 2 episodes, we've been talking about what's the deal? Is it a serious thing, and what to expect going week by week? One of the elements that we touched on previously that I think is really important is about environment, setting your environment up for success. But a big, big part of that is finding accountability partners that are going to be a success for you. So Kevin and I are going to be really diving into that in this episode. And we wanted to start with the psychology of behavior change. So Kevin, if you want to get into that right away, let's go ahead and do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to psychology of behavior change, it's very clear that we are very much products of our environment. So for example, if you're trying to get a lot of work done where you have to really focus in on something, where are you going to be more able to focus, in a quiet room or at a noisy arcade? Sounds kind of obvious. Obviously, it's going to be more the quiet room. But also, if you tempt yourself with, with friends who just casually talk about maybe some of the porn they watch. I mean, maybe that's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but they might just they might be putting themselves in situations where, or they might just be like, hey, look at this hot girl on Instagram, right? Even just little stuff like that can completely mess you up and all of a sudden, like, you're feeling normal, right? And you don't feel tempted. All of a sudden you feel tempted just because one of your friends just didn't know that you were trying this out. So it's really important to surround yourself with accountability partners from that standpoint. So also another part too is, this was done by a researcher named Daniel Kahneman in either the 80s or the 90s, but he basically found that human beings are much more motivated by avoiding pain than they are seeking pleasure. Okay, so if you can structure your environment so that the pain of you failing is greater than the pleasure of you relapsing, then you can really you can really kind of force success to happen. Now, that might be a little bit more of an intense way to do things, but when you have an accountability partner who really believes in you, and you feel and they will feel that you let them down if you relapse. Even just, we talk about guilt and how you don't want to feel guilt, but if you can kind of help fuel your purpose as to why you do this, as saying, well, I don't want to let my accountability partner down. I don't want to let this community down, right? A lot of people are more driven by helping other people than just themselves, because it's easy to let yourself down. It's a lot harder to let down a whole group of people who believe in you, So having a community like that can be really, really effective. Yeah.
Wow, Kevin, I really like that point, in the sense that, think about this. When it comes to group work, right? You're in class back in college or high school, you're assigned some group work. If you sit down with your group and each person in the group is assigned a role, and the intent is that at the end, every person is going to do their part, and then you're going to have this final project available, right? That you're going to present as a group. Now, some people end up not doing their part, and someone else has to pick up the load. I can't speak for that person because I have never been that person, but I imagine they have to feel at least a little bit guilty. I know on the receiving side, I was frustrated that I had to pick up the slack for that person. Now, I don't know if you should really think about it exactly in that regard when it comes to being an accountability partner and entering into No Nut November together. But the bottom line is, your role is not just for you if you're with an accountability partner. Yes, it's a constant reminder that you guys are trying to attain the same thing. But if you fail, you're actually making it more difficult for your partner too. And I think that's the aspect, Kevin, that you touched on there, that ends up being a motivator, hopefully, if you set it up the right way for yourself. That, hey, let's look at this in a positive light. if I can be successful, if I can bring my part to the group, I can be a reminder to the others that they need to fulfill their part. If I fail, I'm making it harder for them to succeed because they have to pick up the slack. And that's, I think, an element of this as well. The other big thing, I love that you talked about behavior change and building the right environment, because the person that I thought of immediately was Stephen King. Stephen King has a great book called On Writing. If you're ever trying to become a better writer, I highly recommend you pick it up. But one of the things he really harps on in the book is setting up your writing environment. As a creative person, you need to have a space that is consistently where you do your work. Because what you're doing is you're training your brain to say, when I'm in this space, there are no other distractions that I'm going to be paying attention to. I'm just going to be writing. And that takes a lot of discipline, but it takes setting up your environment. He talks about blowing up your television, throwing away your phone, sitting in that room at a start time, but not having an end time. Those can be pretty intense things to try to do, but I actually feel that as applicable when it comes to doing No Nut November as well. If you have an accountability partner, I encourage you to talk to that person beforehand. What are the things we're going to set up to put us in success in our environment? Number one, how often you're going to contact each other. Number two, what are we going to do with our phones? This should not be in constant access for me when I'm sleeping, for example. This should be across the room, plugged in, on silent, right? Make it easier for yourself. Things like that are going to be huge. And then your accountability partner's job is not necessarily to call you up and say, hey, did you fail yet? Or, hey, how hard is this? It's really hard, huh? It's more like, hey, make sure that you're doing your routine stuff, man. Make sure you put your phone away at night, but hit me up in the morning if you're having any trouble or whatever. I've been doing this. Those are the kinds of things you need to be doing with your accountability partner and setting up yourself for an environment of success.
Absolutely. That's a great point, man. It's important that you and your accountability partner are on the same page and you guys have a similar plan that you guys can both hold yourself accountable to, and not really just rely on them of, when you're feeling tempted or for them to feel tempted with you. It's like, okay, well, if you guys have kind of a similar game plan, that you guys are both sticking to the game plan, because then it feels like more of a team effort. So I think that's a great point, man. Great point.
And on top of that, I just want to add, to bring back to the Stephen King reference, right? If the one room is established as just your writing room, how about making your bedroom only be a space for sleeping, right? I think, for example, one of the things we've talked about on this podcast in the past, Kevin, is the places where you are alone and isolated are the places that you're more likely to relapse, because it's just you and the comfort of your bed and your computer or whatever else, right? But if you made your bedroom the place where you sleep, if you found, for example, that that's where you're more likely to relapse is in your bedroom, an easy way to set your environment up for success is to say, okay, while I'm in here, the computer is off, the TV is off, my phone is not bedside, because this is where I sleep. And what you're going to do is you're going to train your brain through behavior change and consistency that this is not a place where I do those things. And you're going to make it easier in the long term to circumvent those issues, I guess, if you could say it that way.
Yeah.
And you can do that in every area.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar to how it might feel weird for you to, watch porn and, masturbate to it at the dining room table. Similarly, your bed is going to start to feel kind of weird too. It's like, this doesn't feel right for me to do this here. So here's another thing too, because I hear this all the time. I'm glad you mentioned this with the, phone by the bed. A lot of times I hear guys say, well, I use my alarm clock for my phone. That's perfectly fine. There's a few things you can do here, because I do the same thing. You could put your phone on the other side of the room. That actually does one or two things. If you have like a no phone rule for your bed, then you're going to be way less tempted. Also, when you wake up in the morning, I don't know about you, but I smack the snooze button like 5 times if the phone's right next to me. It helps you actually get up off your ass and get about your day. But also, if you have a small room, man, it's like you have to make a decision about how much this really matters to you. Because if it matters to you enough, you're just going to buy an alarm clock, okay? And then just leave your phone out of the room or something. So that's something that you have to determine as well. And again, it's really important to make sure that if you make that decision, your accountability partner is doing the same thing, right? This is a team effort. If you have a no phone in your bed policy, then your accountability partner should have the same policy as well.
I think the more intentional you can be about setting up your environment, the more successful you're going to end up being. Because, Kevin, maybe you could touch on this more, but relying on willpower alone, that, I'm going to say the words, is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's actually a great book on this. It's conveniently titled Willpower Doesn't Work. It's by a guy named Benjamin Hardy. It's really great because he talks about how, it really just doesn't work. And he goes into all of these different examples of, these different studies and these different real life examples of how people just trying to rely on willpower inevitably fail. And the alternative to using willpower is to structure your environment for success. Now, here's the thing. Willpower is still necessary. You're still going to have to use it. But willpower is like a muscle. It fatigues the more that you use it. And the amount of willpower you can use wanes throughout the day. And there have actually been studies on this that have done as well, where people's willpowers are really high in the morning, but they tend to wane as the time goes on. And conveniently, when are most of us going to be tempted to fall to our unhealthy porn habits? Probably at night, right? After a long, stressful day, you want some stress relief, or you're bored, you're just sitting there, you have nothing to do after a long day. And then your hypothalamus lights up, and all of a sudden you're horny, you want to watch porn. The odds of you resisting that at the end of the day, as opposed to the beginning of the day, are much lower. So you want to almost assume that you're in a weak state, that you need to make sure that your environment's perfectly set up so that the temptations that arise, you limit your capabilities of giving into that temptation, but you also limit the possibility of those temptations arising in the first place. So willpower, it's necessary to have. You can train it, definitely, but to rely upon it isn't really a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that I anticipate is, because I know this has been me at times, is like to think, oh, hang on, I've got enough control to be able to have my phone over here. I want to be able to call somebody if I want to, or text, or look at Instagram or something. Why should I have to put it across the room? I can have enough self-control to do that. What I would say is, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you do it to some degree, but are you making it too hard for yourself when you don't have to? And I think that there's a certain level of humility that has to be in play if you're trying to really make this a launch pad for success in the future. You're trying to actually instigate behavior change in your life. There's a level of humility that's needed here to say, like, first of all, I cannot do this on my own. I think that's a big part about having an accountability partner, is being able to recognize, if I can do this on my own, it's 1,000 times harder. But I probably can't do this on my own. I need people who support me in some way, shape, or form, whether that be just encouraging me, or talking to me, or helping me get resources like you guys are doing with this podcast. I hope that you can consider us accountability partners for you. In fact, if you ever need to ask a question, if you're like frustrated about how to get something done, you can reach out to us on this show, and we'd love to be able to address some of those issues if anyone ever feels strongly that you want us to talk about something specifically. But I just think that the more you can have humility in saying, look, it might actually be a good thing to step away from your phone during November anyway. It might be a social media reset for you. It's like detox. This is a pretty intense thing we're talking about doing, but it can be so rewarding. And so I would think the more you can have the humility to say, hey, listen, I could keep my phone by my bed, but why not? Like Kevin said, keep it across the room. And if I have to, buy an alarm clock. Who cares? One other thing I would say too is maybe you don't really like the idea of having certain websites restricted on your network, but if you really feel strongly enough, one of the things that I encourage you to do is actually put blockers on your system. You know, there's family friendly settings you can put on your browsers and other things that at least try to inhibit you from going and looking at something that you shouldn't be looking at during this time. And that's going to take some humility to put that on your own devices. But if you can put something like that on your phone and your computer, it makes that very intense but very short window for relapse a little bit easier to get past.
Absolutely. And here's another cool thing that you can do as well. Because, you know, if you're trying to kick a porn addiction, you might as well try to kill two birds with one stone, maybe cut out your social media addiction in a way as well. Actually, one of the things that we suggest is limit your social media consumption because it's so hypersexualized now. It's gonna, you know, tempt you to relapse anyway. You can actually go, if you have an iPhone, you can go into your phone and go, I won't show you the specific settings, but if you Google how to turn your phone into grayscale, it actually takes out all of the color from your phone. Because a lot of what draws us to our phone and just kind of messes us up psychologically is all these pretty colors that comes from the LED screen. That kind of zaps you and also makes you want to be drawn to your phone. It's very surprising. As soon as you turn to grayscale and you see everything is gray, you like automatically you notice that you're grabbing your phone less because you get less of a dopamine hit because you're not really seeing anything. You're just seeing black and white. So that can actually be something that's very effective as well.
Or setting timers on your social media, right? You can only do it 10 minutes a day, something like that.
Yeah.
You can do a
And it's
lot.
really, yeah, absolutely. Just the more little things you do, they all kind of add up, you know? But to shift it back to the accountability part, you know, I think it's important to have, because you never know when these temptations are going to arise. And this is why we're trying to create a community that's worldwide, because, you know, you might be tempted at nighttime. Let's say you wake up randomly in the middle of the night, you have to go pee or something, you can't go back to sleep. And all of a sudden you have this urge to fap. Your accountability partner, who maybe lives on the other side of town, is probably asleep. So what do? Well, you could just go into our Facebook group and say, hey, you know, help me out, guys, talk me through this or something. And someone on the other side of the world is probably going to respond because we're trying to create a worldwide community, you know?
Yeah.
So being part of a community, having an immediate accountability partner that you know and trust, and also is trying to do this, go through this the same as you are, but also having a wider community in a this I was about to say safe space, but I guess that's technically what it is. That's kind of like a meme-worthy way of saying it. But kind of in like a safe community where everyone's trying to do the same thing is very, very key. And those little things, like having just those things like the grayscale thing we're talking about, having your phone on the other side of the room, not having it beside your bed, and then also having just a large community that you feel like you're a part of a team. That's so key to get through this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and as we're going forward, we're going to talk more in the next episode about how to choose an accountability partner, because it shouldn't just be the one guy off the street. There really is, this person has to be in it too, either for you or with you. You know, maybe they're on the same journey. That's great if they are, but also if you can just find somebody that you really trust, you can be vulnerable with, and who you're not worried about judging you. I think that's a good aspect of the accountability partner. We're going to be really diving into that in the following episodes about how to choose an accountability partner. But I do think, Kevin, the intentionality of just sending a message on the Facebook group, even if someone doesn't respond to you within the time that you're feeling like you might relapse, the intentionality of saying, no, you know what, I'm going to talk to somebody about this rather than give in, a lot of times that can be enough. I know you talked about just recording a voicemail for somebody is sometimes helpful.
Yeah, and even just getting your thoughts out of your mind onto a public platform,
Yeah.
even if nobody responds immediately, you know, consciously you're just like, well, someone's gonna respond tomorrow. Someone's gonna see that and be like, hey, how'd you do? So, all right. So, yeah, let's start to kind of wrap this episode up. I want to do a quick little review of No Nut November. No Nut November, it's amazing. You should do it. It's the best opportunity you could possibly have to start. And I want you guys to look back on these episodes and all the other episodes as well during your No Nut November journey, so that you're constantly reminded of what to do, having the right techniques and everything. Anything else to add besides that, Peter?
I just want to say that, Kevin, I think your resources are valuable on YouTube, and the fact that you just did No Nut November last year and you kind of video categorize that. So please feel free to check out his YouTube for those videos if you want an idea of what that might be like going forward. And if you have any questions for us about, what we're doing, what some resources you can use. And if you like the show, I really encourage you to rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts, as well as obviously on YouTube. I hope you join us for No Nut November. Kevin, I'm excited to see who joins us on this.